Let me share the screen. First of all, let me welcome all of you. Good evening, everyone. This is a NAST-sponsored LARIG webinar session, and we are most happy to welcome everyone that have joined, and we are grateful for your support. Today, let me introduce myself. I'll share the screen here, and then I will introduce myself and my dear colleague, Dr. Ortiz. Okay, let me share screen. Okay. Are you all able to view the screen now? Is it okay? Right. So welcome again. Our session is titled Raíces y Agua. This is our high school science teachers. They address water quality in the Rio Grande Valley through culturally sustaining environmental STEM lessons. And it is a NARST virtual event hosted by LARIG, which is Latino Research Interest Group. So the agenda for today is like very simple, but very powerful, I believe. So let us introduce the panelists. Like I am Dr. Uma Ganesan. I'm the chair of the LARIG group at NAST and also an assistant professor of STEM education at University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. It is down south, the southernmost tip of the United States. And so that's me. And my able colleague here, Dr. Miriam Ortiz, is also my dear colleague and the chair-elect of Latino Research Interest Group. So, Dr. Ortiz, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Ganesan. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Miriam Ortiz, and I'm really looking forward to sharing and learning from everybody tonight, and very honored to be here and looking forward to today's event. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So we both will be facilitators for this event. So the thing is like we have four panelists, awesome panelists with us. So the first presentation will be from the Brownsville ISD science teachers from Veterans Memorial Early College High School, Miss Evelyn Alejandro and Miss Beatriz Escobedo. And then the second presentation will be from the San Benito Consolidated Independent School District teachers, science teachers again, with Susan De Pau and Miss Celine Becerra. And then we will have a fun panel discussion with a Q&A, which I will facilitate and also ask some meaningful questions to the participants. And of course, the audience QA and the concluding remarks will be done by Dr. Miriam Ortiz. So that is the plan and agenda for today. And here are our panelists for tonight. So, and then I will pass the baton over to Evelyn and Beatrice. Kindly take it forward and please take your time to do your presentation. Thank you. And whenever you need me to move on to the slides, just prompt me so I can move on to the next slide. Okay.
All right, well, welcome everyone. My name is Evelyn Alejandro. Like Dr. Vanessa said, I am a teacher at Veterans Memorial Early College High School. I conducted a lesson alongside with Ms. Coedo. We have different sections, but we both we both taught environmental science at the time. So I conducted this lesson on environmental science honors class, majority of juniors and seniors. And the reason we chose the class was because, well, one, it fits the topic. We were able to analyze different bodies of water in the Rio Grande Valley. We were able to understand pollution, what sustainability is, what are environmental injustices, and we were able to use the fact that some of them lived in Matamoros, some of them live here, so that we can be able to incorporate that different linguistic use, English and Spanish, and also let them see how civic action can be different here and over there, and how pollution varies here and over there. That was my take.
Well, hello everyone. My name is Beatriz Escobedo. Alongside Evelyn, we conducted this lesson with the environmental science students, which mainly composes of juniors and seniors. And the importance of this lesson was making real world connections but also adapting their native language. We live in a city where it's 97 predominantly Hispanic students. And I had the pleasure of working with students that were living in Matamoros and they were living in Bronzeville. So I was able to gather samples from both cities that are so crucial to the area that we live in. So we provided a context on the water issues we currently face in Texas, but more specifically in our region. They were able to understand the Rio Grande Valley that shares resources between the United States and Mexico. A lot of the students aren't aware of the water treaty that was established here between Brownsville and Mexico, that consists of the Gulf of Mexico, and how a lot of the farmers are actually struggling because that water treaty is not being respected. So the great thing about this lesson, like I said, culturally, we were able to implement their native language. And then we were also able to implement, real world connections that matter not only to them, but their family as well, because we were able to interview family members, make that connection not only to the student, but reach out to the family as well, grandparents, mothers. And most of the time, unfortunately, in our culture, in this region, some of them don't speak English. So the fact that we were able to adapt the lesson for them to be able to use linguistically their native language make the huge difference.
Should I move on? Next slide. Okay.
So this was a portion that both mine and Miss Goyle's lesson both shared. We were able to have our kids go out and collect and analyze different bodies of water that they have living around or they have close to their areas. So we had our kids look at Google Maps, open up a satellite view, identify different bodies of water. They can be canales, resacas, lagunas, anything that's close by, collect water samples, bring them back to class, and we were able to analyze them. On the next slide, we have some samples of their summaries. So for example, with my kiddos, I had them get 3 samples of water. We did a simple just water testing kit. It was able to have them look at different chemicals or contaminants present like copper, phosphorus, chlorine. The list was very long, but it was good to have them notice, one, there's a body of water close by, and two, these are some of the contaminants that we have. And we connected it to the curriculum that we have on finding what source is providing that contaminant. A lot of them were able to realize, oh, there's a Walmart close by. I noticed that the parking lot has a lot of oil spills on them. The student that has or lives in Matamoros was able to realize that, oh, close by there is a factory of the sample I got. And so it was great. We were able to set out these pink cards all over the classroom, and the kids were able to walk around, look at their findings, and then at the end, go ahead and reflect on what is it you're seeing. And so most of them were surprised to notice that, those samples of water that they have their dogs drinking water from, that they sometimes go and fish in, are very contaminated. It was a bit nice. I mean, not the context wise, but it was good seeing them disengaged, talking about their findings and wanting to find out more. So I took that engagement, and you can put the next slide. I used the fact that they were already really engaged to go ahead and, you know what? Let's actually see what are the actual findings of contaminants that we are being shown. So I brought up PUB's contaminants list. Every now and then they send you like through the mail what is it that you're supposed to have in your water, but it's not as detailed as what you find online. So I gave them what you find online, plus also EWG's, it's an environmental working group's findings on what contaminants we have in our water. And even on the website, you can put in what utility you have or utility board you use. And the kids were extremely surprised by what they're finding. So both of them are transparent enough to show you these are the contaminants you have. This is how much you have of it. This is how much you're supposed to have. This is the exceeding amounts. And then if they were to click on, for example, details on the screenshot on the right, it also would show you what effects it has on your health. And so these kids were a bit angry about this. Most of those details were relating to, oh, cancer, pregnancy, negative pregnancy effects, fetal developments, and the list was really just endless. And most of the findings that they would have was cancer. And so a lot of the kids were like, oh, I have family members who have cancer, and I have family members who have this, and oh, the miscarriages. And it was just a lot to take in. But at the same time, it was good that they're noticing this. Now, I asked them, is this something you guys notice at home, something your parents, your family members talk about? And the response is no. Some of them were like, we cook using the water from the sink, or we have our pets drink this water, and so we use that momentum to go ahead and present to them the next part of a lesson. So if you could switch the slide, please. The next part of the lesson was, all right, so this is what we are experiencing. We are considered an area with a high minority group, right? And we are also economically disadvantaged. There is another area here in the United States, Flint, Michigan, who's going through the same problem as us, very similar, except now the people are rising up because they're noticing this as a problem. And we were talking about it as a group, as a class, and we're realizing, well, here in the Valley, this isn't talked about enough. Now I'm starting to see more Facebook posts, but back then when we were doing this lesson, they were like, this isn't something family members discuss. And so we brought up these two articles discussing Flint, Michigan's environmental justice classes, students bringing up these topics and them wanting to make change. And so we use this as a way to get the kids to realize, you know what, you do have a voice. You have a voice. You guys are going to end up being part of our society very soon in terms of becoming adults who can make changes happen. You guys are going to start college. And so notice these environmental injustices that we are going through. Notice that there isn't really much being done, similar to over here, this in Flint, Michigan. But now these are younger adults starting to realize it. And so let's find a way to make something happen. And so we went ahead and, can you switch the slide? We went ahead and got that same momentum, and we had them, you know what, let's take this conversation home. Like Mrs. Coelho said, most of these family members don't discuss this at home. And even if we were to try and encourage them, it's really hard to get the kids wanting to talk about what we teach in school to go home and discuss. So we kind of forced them to, but it was good. It was great. We had them write a short letter, a short abstract, if you may, before a family member, intended for them to read to a family member, get them involved, interview them after they have read their paper. And the paper was to discuss the contaminants, the health effects, where they're noticing these contaminants are found, and compare it to what we saw with those two articles, Flint, Michigan, and what's going on there. And so I did have a lot of students come back and tell me, you know what, after telling it to my abuela, to my tío, to my tía, to my mom, to my little sister, and some of them did have recordings. It was conversations that they were like, oh, yes, we are aware that some of them said that their parents knew that the water was contaminated. And there was others who were like, no, we didn't know. I mean, the water looks different, the water tastes different from when you go and travel elsewhere, but it's never really a light bulb that clinks. And so some students were very surprised to know that this wasn't something that you have a trusted adult that they don't realize is an issue. And so there's some kids who were like, you know what, yes, my family knows, but they just never told me, which is also a bit concerning because they were like, they let me go and drink this water. And so I used that same momentum to go ahead and bring up that environmental injustice voice. So if you could switch the slide, please. To finish off my lesson, and this was a 2.5, almost a 3-week lesson, I had them become an environmentalist, bring that environmentalist out of you. Like I said, most of these kids come to school and they realize it's just a class. Gotta get the grade and move on. But I wanted them to notice like what you're learning, take it with you, go do something with it. And so I brought up the Federal Water Pollution Control Act in 1972, the Clean Water Act, and the Water Quality Act. And so these are the policies that are in place. What are some ways you can become an environmentalist, create your own law, or make changes to these laws to obviously help better the conditions we have our water in? And so this was great. I had some kids work by themselves. I had some kids working in a partner because they lived close to each other based on where they got water samples from. I asked them, you know what, find ways so that we can reduce the cause of these contaminants, the pollutant sources, find ways so that we can make or encourage our community to use sustainable use of water, um, reduce the amount of overpumping we do. Like Mrs. Escobar said, we do have lots of farmers down here. So what regulations can we provide to them, to our schools, to our homes, to our cities, so that we can have our whole community become part of the solution? And so it was great seeing these kids try to get those gears running, especially because they already had some type of personal connection to it. They had already, like I said, gone home, discussed this with family. They had some type of emotion behind it of, oh my gosh, I've been fishing here for so long. And now they're as a group, realizing we should probably do something about this. So that was the way my lesson worked. To provide what Ms. Ganesan wanted us to have our kids see. They ended up becoming the environmentalists we wanted for them to be at the end of the day. Even with that one student who was coming from Matamoros, who comes every day, his laws were a little different. His policy that he created was very, very different to everybody else's. But it was great to see how different things work over there. And he encouraged most of our students to also realize, you know what, there's changes over here, but these are some of the things I would like to do for my community. Mrs. Escobar.
Excellent. Yes,
Sorry.
thank you so much. Yes.
Thank you. You can switch the slide.
Mhm.
So for my class, because our population of students varies, now I do have a lot of ELO Spanish-speaking students in my classroom. I first started introducing the students with the chapter's purpose and goals by acquiring the terms of the different bodies of water. We live in a region where we call different bodies of water certain vocabulary that you wouldn't find it anywhere else, like resaca. Where else can I call it? What in any other state? How can I determine what a resaca is? Or a laguna. Yes, it's a lagoon, but it's completely different. So the students were introduced these vocabulary terms, but they were also be able to make the connection in Spanish. So when Dr. Ganesa introduced the lesson, she said, you know what? You don't have to limit these children into just using English, because that's one thing in the curriculum that we've been presented. We've been very limited on, like, you know what? Even though they're native Spanish speakers, unfortunately, we need to move forward with English, which I completely understand. But unfortunately, sometimes students get lost within the vocabulary. So that's what for me was incredibly important, to actually make the connection and that bridge where, you know what, we can use these native words that unfortunately cannot be translated into English. Resaca, what are you going to say resaca is in English? Yes, it's a body of water, but there's a different term within it. So that was the first thing that I wanted to establish. And then I remember when we met and she proposed the project, which we were going to be doing water quality. And I remember just speaking, of our experiences here in Brownsville, and Evelyn brought something up, that growing up, she couldn't wear white to school. And I was like, wait, what? And Evelyn and I were from different parts of town. And we went to different high schools. And I was like, what do you mean? And she's like, yeah, every time I would wash my white clothes, they were always yellow. So I really wouldn't wear white to school. And that just struck my mind, like, oh my God, these are issues that we're facing here in our city, within our city limits, and things we're not even aware of. So I proposed that question to my students. And sure enough, because in the school that we're at, it's very competitive. So we get students from different parts of town. It's not necessarily that they're zoned to our school, but because of the curriculum that we serve, a lot of them want to attend our school. So I was able to get samples from different parts of town, including Matamoros. So if you could please turn the slide. So we moved on with the ecological footprint. Students learned that the environmental impact that their everyday choices have by determining their water footprint. A lot of people are not aware of their water footprint. What do we mean by that? Well, how much time do you spend taking a shower? How much time do you spend going to the restroom? How much time do you spend brushing your teeth? Do you have a gray water system in your home, or do you implement it where you can use that bathing water to wash your car? How much recycling of water are we really doing? Or are you aware that we can do that? And unfortunately, a lot of students didn't know, like, oh, you know what? In the rancho, my grandparents growing up, they did that and they didn't even know. They remember that the grandmothers used to wash the dishes. So then they would take that water out and either they would water the plants or they would reuse that water either to wash cars or to just recycle it. So students were able to learn how to take responsibility for conserving water on their daily lives and understanding the current issues of water scarcity. Once again, the water treaty that we're facing here that is not being respected, and a lot of students are not aware of what's happening in a region. Unfortunately, we were known for growing certain crops here in the valley, and the number one, of course, is citrus, which that's still prevalent. It still grows, but there was a sugar cane also being grown here in the valley. Unfortunately, because of the water treaty not being respected, that pro, um, that produce wasn't able to be grown anymore because of the demand of the water. So those were some of the issues that we're facing here. Now I have a lot of students where their grandparents were farmers, where they were migrant workers, and they were affected by this. And I'm not talking about now, I'm talking about the 90s and the 80s when these crops were being grown in this area. So they were able to understand, like, oh, that's why these factories closed. That's why we weren't able to go along with it. If you can please turn the next slide. Now, the key factors for raising protein-rich foods in the South Texas, we learned about the climate, the land and grazing, and the water usage, as I mentioned. And we talked about how South Texas has a semi-arid climate with long, hot summers and mild winters, and why the demand of water is so high here. But water, people don't understand that it can be highly costly. A lot of people think, well, rainwater. Unfortunately, because we live in a dry area, we don't get a lot of rainwater. So unfortunately, that's why we have these protein-rich foods that are dependent on that. If you can please switch the slide. Now, after that, we wanted to know, okay, so what water are we using to water these plants? And how are these plants being affected if the water is polluted? So this is where we implemented the lab. So the water pollution lab investigated water samples from different bodies of water, including, like I mentioned, Brownsville, Matamoros. So the students were able to bring two samples, one from their home and one from a public place. So what we did in my classroom is I compared their water sample to the public place. And most of the time, you wouldn't believe it. But unfortunately, the water from their home was more contaminated and polluted than from the public area. So then we moved on to the second phase. From the students that brought their water samples from Matamoros, I compared the water samples from Matamoros to Brownsville. And they were able to compare the impurities and which water was more polluted. Here's where we had another surprise. A lot of students here believe that, well, you know what? We're in Texas, we're in the United States, we're in Brownsville. Our water is going to be cleaner. And they were able to realize, like, no, I'm sorry, but the water from Matamoros, it is clean. Their tap water is more clean. It has less impurities than the tap water here in Brownsville. And then, of course, we compare the public water to our public water, and it was around the same. It wasn't a lot of discrepancies as it was for the tap water found in the home. If you could please switch. So here I was able to provide some of the data analysis, and you can see some of the actual chemicals that we were testing. And some of the chemicals that were tested were the chlorine, the chromium, the copper, the cyanide, the iron, the nitrate, the phosphorus, the sulfide. And you could see that there was a lot of reactants within those chemicals, which allowed us to realize, like, you know what, there is a lot of impurities in our Brownsville water. Unfortunately, we're very aware of what's happening in Flint, Michigan. We're aware of the impurities of the water, what's going on over there. But people don't realize that those same impurities are within our water system, and they're not able to realize, like, you know what, we have issues within our water that the population here in Brownsville is not even aware of. Now, like Evelyn mentioned, they're becoming more aware. We're seeing more articles. We did have a student present a science fair project, and he actually advanced to nationals, and he was able to find out arsenic in a body of water, and that same body of water was providing water for a daycare. Of course, all this information couldn't be released because then there were going to be issues with the daycare. But, the more we dig, the more we find. And that's what's actually, allowing these students to understand, like, we don't have to go and study the water in Flint, Michigan. Let's study our water first. Let's find out what our water is made up of, and then we can dig into other places. And not only that, it doesn't only have to be here in Brownsville. Let's dig into Matamoros. A lot of people have family members in Matamoros. If you can please switch the slide.
Yes, I think thank you so much, both Evelyn and Beatrice, for presenting such powerful examples. And I'm so grateful to be working with you in professional development and also, helping us to, learn from you all. So that's one thing which I learned, and I'm sure our audience will also learn. And I would like to remind you all, this is already going to be recorded, and it is recorded, and it will be available in the NARST YouTube channel. So it is going to be widely seen by the global community of NARST. So just wanting to remind you all that it's going to be a permanent recording available on the NARS website and YouTube channel. So just wanting to make sure everybody knows this. And now we are moving on to our next set of participants and panelists from San Benito High School, Ms. Susan DePau and Ms. Celine Becerra, who are teaching, like Susan is teaching AP Environmental Science, and Celine had taught chemistry honors and still teaching. So let's welcome them, and please let me know when to pass on to the next slide. So that'll be fantastic. Okay.
Hello, everyone. I'm Selena Becerra. I teach chemistry honors and other chemistry courses here at San Benito High School. And we decided to kind of make our presentation dual, like together.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, hello, I'm Susan DePau. I teach AP Environmental Science. I've been teaching that for my second year now. Together, we decided we collaborate on this together, even though she teaches chemistry and I teach environmental science. We thought that we could connect this in a way that would bring out the students' cultural and linguistic backgrounds also. So we managed to do that pretty well. We work well together.
Yeah. So even though, we teach different things, we're able to just merge the two and generally have like the same idea, but just using, I did chemistry and she focused on the environmental science. So in chemistry, I focused on things that I already teach, and I was like, okay, well, I need to incorporate this into my lessons. What do we already teach, and how can we mold this into this project? And so I decided to go into polarity, universal solvents, intermolecular forces of attraction. We did various labs. We watched various videos in preparation for water contamination and all that stuff, and which all culminated to our big project of creating a portable filtration system. And so that's what we did on the chemistry aspect.
And from my environmental science point of view, what we did with that, I actually thought we could go from a municipal standpoint and look at where the water came from and where the source in San Benito, the drinking water, ended up at our high school, and test that, and then test it after they filtered it with the homemade filters, and they did all that on their own. It was really awesome. But we what we started with was the municipal water source, which happens to be a Resaca at Haven Park in San Benito. So I went and collected water there that we use for our samples, and they tested for pH, turbidity, and nitrates, and a lot of other things just with the home tests, and iron content, lead, and things like that. Also, just long list of stuff. But they really they immediately saw how the water quality was not abstract anymore. That was actually affecting them, because they go to the school and drink the water, and half the time they'll say, "Oh, the water over here, in this wing tastes terrible, and the water over here tastes better." And they even have filtered water stations at our school, and even then they complain about the water. And then I have other students that would amazingly say, "Well, I don't like the taste of bottled water, because they were used to the way the Rio Grande Valley water tasted, which really alarmed me. But yeah, so you can go ahead and change to the next slide. So the students automatically noticed the turbidity differences and the pH shifts, possible contamination indicators. And they also learned that the clear water doesn't always mean that it's clean, because it looked pretty clear, especially after they filtered it. But they started talking about this and asking questions about the infrastructure and environmental responsibility, and what they could do to make some changes with that, as far as environmental justice goes.
Yeah, and then in the chemistry side, they quickly realized that even when we filter things and we remove certain particles, a lot of the times these ions can remain there, and which really tied into all of our lessons, like on polarity and on solubility, and just really focusing on water and all of its amazing properties, but what stays dissolved in there. Um, And so they used all that information to help them design their filtration system. Like at this point, they were really engaged, and they really wanted to, because when they saw that water, they were disgusted. Like they were really disgusted on how dirty it is, and it was a big challenge for them to learn different filtration processes and try to perfect their project.
Go to the next slide.
Okay, so here where we're talking about the cultural and linguistic connections, I think one of the most meaningful parts of this was when we engaged in those family interviews. They they were basically asking their parents what it was like as a child for them, what they had to go through for cleaner water, and they would talk about, oh yeah, it was very common practice to boil their water. It was very common practice to like get water from like norias, which are like wells, but and they would just talk about how they were, I guess, used to, like Susan was talking about, like that taste. But yeah, those interviews were pretty powerful.
Yeah, I agree that what really struck me was their honesty in these interviews. A lot of them were really powerful. Some of them discussed like growing up in poverty or relying on bottled water even at times. But other ones realized that their families' experiences were part of basically a larger environmental justice story. They talked about all their experiences with filtering and everything else, and and getting water that was really, gross. Sometimes they talk about how it would smell like bleach, and I asked them, well, why do you think that is? And they discovered that they put chlorine in the water in order to get rid of the bacteria. And I've had students comment that not only smelled like bleach, but they felt the difference on their clothes. Like I think one of you said earlier that she wouldn't wear white to school because of the yellowing factor, and I saw a lot of kids with the similar experiences as that. Um, and what was neat about the interviews also is that their bilingual culture, um, it really validated students' linguistic identities, and that was awesome. That was really awesome to see that Spanish like became a resource, not I guess not a barrier, right?
Mhm. Excellent. Yes. And yeah.
Okay, so for their student leadership and agency in chemistry, the challenge was pretty much them designing it themselves. Like they they had a specific goal, right, which is to clean the water, right, to filter that water and to get it from that nasty state to something that was in a better condition. So they were researching endlessly, and they tried different techniques. When they saw that something wasn't working, they went through so many of those strips, each time testing over and over and over again. And it was just kind of like this mission. Like they wanted to be the one with the best results. And they designed and they redesigned and they retried and retested. And it was just very remarkable, like the amount of effort and designing that went into it. And I was very surprised. I even had some students say things like, oh, wow, this is the most effort I've ever put into a science experiment. And it was just very rewarding to see them take it on themselves, and not just me telling them, okay, you're going to do it this way. No, they researched on their own.
Yeah, I agree. Mine did too. From my environmental science side, I really encouraged student-led inquiry, and so they really had to interpret their own data, and it was amazing to see them working on it. They made decisions about basically what contaminants mattered, and they justified that those engineering choices when they made their filters. We had some really interesting designs on those filters from them.
Excellent.
Oh yeah, those are some of Susan's.
Oh yes, those are some of them that they designed. I really liked the one that was he actually used 3-meter sticks because he couldn't find the proper sticks, I guess the size sticks that he wanted to use, and that's cheesecloth there. And then he had them layered with charcoal and different substances in each level. Yeah, I really enjoyed watching just the designs that they made on these. It was quite interesting, and they really took hold of it.
Okay. Next slide.
Okay, now on this one, I just wanted to talk about the powerful connection that they made on their own. They started asking questions like, why does my grandmother, boil the water? Why does this neighborhood have better water than we do? And they started like questioning things like that. And uh, basically through the chemistry and the environmental science activities, they both had naturally led students that basically went into that environmental justice part of the scheme here.
Yeah, and then you can like see how they were just so excited to see, like, wow, look at what we did. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay.
And then for here, what on teaching through environmental justice lens, this project changed. It truly changed the way I teach chemistry, especially around that unit, because it was always just kind of like, oh, okay, here's what we need to learn about water, and here's what we learn about polarity, and this project like made it come to life. Instead of keeping content abstract, we connected these molecular concepts to their actual experiences. And the environmental justice gave my curriculum like relevance, and it gave it depth. And it was just very rewarding to see the amount of effort that they put into this, and just how empowering it is to turn it over to the students and allow them to create their own experiments. And it's not just, a cookie cutter labs like, okay, do this, do that, and write down the results, but they took ownership. And it was truly an amazing experience. And I thank you so much for inviting us to be a part of it, because I really feel like my students grew from this experience.
Oh yeah, definitely. Mine also. Again, back to the interviews again, they were just amazing. Some of the family stories. Their honesty really struck me. It was quite moving and emotional, and it made it so that we had to create a safe space for them to share these things, and they all became closer through it. It was really good. And with this project, it allowed them to merge like all those personal experiences with that scientific analysis, and their their knowledge. I mean, that they gained, their family stories, their cultural practices, all of it just really elevated that learning.
Excellent. Do you want me to click on this link so that they can see
Oh
student
yes,
work?
just that was what
Yeah.
one of my
Mm-hmm.
students did to wrap it all up, basically.
Yeah.
And I really liked how he put it together. Um, basically, he compared the Resaca water to it being filtered. And we also tested the tap water. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of data on that. We kind of went through this in a time of the year in April there, but yes, but I really liked what he put together. And he just compared all the results that he had there, and it was good. Anyway, I enjoyed. He really enjoyed that piece.
Okay. Should I go to the next slide?
Yes, I think we're just about
I think
done.
that's
Yes.
it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh no, we had
This
one more.
one more. Yeah.
Here we just talked about how we used different strategies, like the root word dissection. So when you all came and shared how to dissect those words, and it was something that I didn't even realize that I do on a daily basis. But especially in chemistry, it's all about, okay, every word has root words and prefixes, and we can connect them all the time throughout. And so it was really neat to use those templates to show them, like, hey, this goes across all curriculum, and it really honored their Hispanic heritage and their vocabulary that they already know, and someone that maybe thinks that they're not as strong in science, they realize, like, hey, I know a lot of these words and I can make these connections. And I think
And to share something, Miss Susan?
Well, just on that note, yes, I used that dissection also, and the kids actually enjoyed it. They enjoyed picking it apart, and they made it sort of a puzzle sort of game. And they really enjoyed, learning that, okay, this prefix means that, and that could be used in different contexts and other words. And it really opened up a great vocabulary activity. It was good.
I think this was such an excellent presentation by all the participants. I really enjoyed, and definitely our participants will definitely love this and would have definitely appreciate the amount of effort you all put in, because it is just that, when I come and try to conceptualize a research, right, but I need partners like you all, so that this can actually benefit our students, right? Like we want to reach our students and also empower them, and that whatever knowledge they have is equally valid and equally powerful in this Eurocentric curriculum, which is science, right? Like, so NAST is a global organization, which is like a National Association for Research in Science Teaching. So with this webinar, we are reaching a global audience, even though the participants here in the webinar might not be like many, but this video is going to go out throughout the world. It's not only in the US. So what I mean to say, because they are from different time zones, so they might not have had the opportunity to join directly live in the webinar, but a few of them did join. So what I mean to say here is, like, when we leverage our students' linguistic and cultural assets and honor their funds of knowledge, we are going to inculcate such a deep sense of what I call scientific curiosity in them. And they are going to further their STEM careers in the future. So that is our main goal, isn't it? Like, as teachers, we all want our students to succeed and also become, scientists, like, any kind of field they choose in the science domain or a STEM domain, it's our success, right? Like, so that's one thing which I would like to tell all our audience here. Now we move on to the next section of the webinar, which is basically to facilitate a panel discussion here. So please feel free. Anyone and everyone can answer this. And please raise your hand when you want to answer some question, and I will take turns to, move on to the next person who would like to answer that question. So, in this particular presentation, you did present about how your water quality investigations, what you did, and how the family interviews had connections, and how well the Spanish and English play a role in your classroom, all that. But I am just curious to know, how did you make space for the students, instead just, as science teachers, we are told, this is our lesson plan, you do this, you do that, right? Like, so how did you create the space rather than just follow the direction? So I'm the teacher here, right? You follow my direction. So how did you create that space? I'm a little curious about that.
Well,
Anyone wants to answer?
sorry. Um, it was definitely a bit of a challenge because we're in a time crunch, right? There's so
Mhm.
much that we have to cover. And here we have this new project where we have to incorporate something else that I'm not used to. And so having them have, their own agency and allowing for the time to redo and redesign, that was the biggest challenge for me because I knew that I didn't have the full class period because I still had other responsibilities. Um, and so it was a challenge, but overall it was so worth it because the level of engagement from them was just phenomenal.
Thank you so much. Yes, anyone else? Yes, Beatrice, please.
I think for me, it was the fact that when you presented the project, you automatically gave us the liberty to plan the lesson to what would be best for the student. For me, my curriculum is very cookie cutter, it's very structured. So I do have to follow it through the T. But when you presented this project, you allowed us to implement also culturally and linguistically the student's background, something that unfortunately within the curriculum is not allowed, not with us, not in our school. It's kind of like, what, unfortunately we do have the Spanish speakers, but we need to move forward through the lesson. We have to teach this. So the fact that these students were allowed to use their Spanish, like Ms. DePau said, it wasn't a hindrance. It was like, what, this can help you out. If there's certain things that you cannot describe or you cannot mention in English, you can say them in Spanish if you feel more comfortable. And I think that's where I gained the level of comfort from my students, that it's like, what, we're not here to judge you, because at the end of the day, in my classes, everybody's bilingual. Whether they want to admit it or not, they understand it and they speak it as well. But, we live here in a society where our Spanish is frowned upon. Everybody wants to speak English. Unfortunately, that's what I noticed in my school. We have this Spanish language speakers that unfortunately they won't even speak in class because their English is not proficient. So now when you give them the liberty, like, what, it's okay, use your Spanish. Now I had a lot of these students, interacting, whereas before I had a tough time getting them to actually be part of the lecture, interact, converse. So for me, that was like the wide awakening, like, wow, when we give these students the liberty and we actually plan what's best for the classroom and the students, you see the difference. You see the difference in the interaction. You see that the students are more involved. They just don't receive a paper and it's like, this is the lesson that we're going to follow. So that's what I noticed in my classroom.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Beatrice. Anyone else for this question? Yeah, please.
Yes, I have to follow up on that also because, I'm learning Spanish still, and I do not have a large grasp on the language. I want to, though. I have a great desire to. And once my students get to know that, and once they start trying to speak a little bit more in English, and I try and speak more in Spanish to them, and I tell them estoy aprendiendo, and please, understand that I'm in the same shoes you are, and they really they open up a lot more. And it's just, it gives them the ability to feel a little more safe in the classroom, I believe. And as far as like letting them have this and giving them kind of no ceiling on this the water quality projects, that really enabled them to get, to get ownership of it and to start doing what they wanted to do within the lesson. And I really appreciated that.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. And of course, if Evelyn, you want to share something, you can, or we can move on to the next question, whichever you prefer. Next question? Okay, that's great. So my next question would be again like uh, you've told me about water quality across the different RGV communities because it's different, right? Like different places have different water quality. How did it change students thinking about environmental justice? Because many people, many of you talked about environmental justice, how they are part of this community, having civic engagement. Am I right? Like, so how did you, like, what changed? Yep.
So in my classroom, because I have students that live in Matamoros and the ones that live here in Brownsville, in their mind, they automatically thought like, you know what, our water's cleaner because we live in the United States and, we have a better water system. And it's like, wait a minute. But then Evelyn attended San Benito High School. She lives in that area around San Benito. And she was facing those issues with the water quality where she would get yellow water. And she mentioned there would be times at her house that the water, they would open up the faucet and the water would be yellow or brownish. And I was like, and I live in Alton Glory, a different part in Brownsville. And I never saw that, you know. But
Mm,
then I had some students that lived in Southmost, which is a rougher area in Brownsville. They were facing the
mm,
same issues Evelyn was facing. So we were
mm,
able to determine the environmental injustice system socioeconomically here in Brownsville, how different
mm.
neighborhoods were unfortunately being affected and others we wouldn't even know. So that's why it blew my mind when she said, yeah, like, growing up, we couldn't wear, I wouldn't wear white to school. And I was like, what do you mean? And that always stuck to the back of my head. So then sure enough, when I started testing the water from my students that lived in different parts of Brownsville, we saw the same disparity. Unfortunately, in different neighborhoods, there's better filtering systems or there's better quality. I currently live in the country club and I guarantee you there's a pipe busted within minutes they arrive. Whereas I've had students that told me they didn't have any hot water for the past week. So I'm like, so you're telling me that, unfortunately, PUB is more active in some neighborhoods than others. So that's where the environmental injustice that my students face here in Brownsville and the misconception that we had better quality, water quality in comparison to Matamoros. But then when the results came out, it's like, no, sorry to tell you, but the water in Matamoros is cleaner than our water because there's higher restrictions. And that's one thing I took a deep dive and it's like, okay, so why is the water in Mexico cleaner than ours? Then I took into a deep dive and I started researching because there are higher restrictions. There's certain chemicals that they're not allowed to use to purify their water. Same thing when it comes to their food. There's a lot more restrictions that we are not even aware. We feel like, because we live in the United States, we're protected more. But unfortunately, that's not the case. Not what I found within our water system.
Exactly. Mhm.
Currently.
What about anyone else to share?
Just to carry on that, it was it was it was interesting to see where at the high school, all the elementaries converge to feed into that one school, and
Mm,
those kids that live in the rancho right off of Military Highway, they get their water from the Military Highway water supply, and so many times they have the boil water notice, and we can't, and it even affected like my own children that they go to the country schools and, oh mom, we couldn't drink from the water fountain today, like they gave us bottled water. And so a lot of my students were commenting on that as well.
Yes, I completely agree. We just got a boil water announcement for Thalingen just about 2 weeks ago, I guess, but I'm not sure whether it's cleared right now, but still, it's very scary, right? Like if you
You
get
know
like
that
this kind of,
I'm sorry, that blows my mind. I've never heard of such thing.
yeah,
Never, I've never like heard mentioning that. I'm like, what? Now you bring it up
that's
on
right.
LinkedIn? I've never heard of such thing. So that
Oh
just shows the
no.
disparities. Like, wow, being in an
Yes.
elementary and letting you know, like, hey, by the way, you can't drink water today. Wow, like
Yeah,
so
yeah,
many
that's the thing, that's
eye-opening.
exactly what I mean by saying that, the people that are most needed or underexplored or underrepresented populations is what is being most exploited. That is the thing we are trying to address in this research is like how much environmental racism is affecting the very people it has to protect. That is what we are really facing. And as STEM educators like ourselves, and also like teacher educators like us, like me and Dr. Ortiz here, we are having a big mountain to pass, or we have a big hurdle to clear. And it's an ongoing problem in education, in STEM education, in teacher education, and so many things that we are facing. So I this is a great segue into the next question which I have. What challenges did you face while implementing this kind of culturally and linguistically sustaining environmental STEM lessons, and how did you navigate them? You can take your time.
For me, it
Yeah.
wasn't like a big challenge, but it was a minor challenge at the beginning of the lesson. Like Mr. Scoville said, in our campus, it's very much no Spanish, only English, no Spanish, only English. And then at the beginning, I was like, all right, guys, we can go ahead and talk in Spanish. And I would speak to them in Spanish, or I would tell them, bring me, like, for example, the students who I know struggle with the English writing, or I know whose parents I've called home only speak Spanish. I tell them, okay, write the assignment was like write a letter home, right? Write it in Spanish. It was a very big like, are you sure? You sure you want me to? And they would ask like two, three times, and I'm like, yes, it won't affect your grade. And so it was a bit of a shock to them in that sense. For the other parts of the lesson, as we gain momentum, on the contrary, it was the first time in a while that I didn't have a challenge of them not wanting to do the assignment because they were actually that engaged and that passionate behind it. So I wouldn't be able to have, or I cannot recall having as many challenges other than just so much the surprise of, are you sure we can do this in Spanish? And I would be like, yes, do it. That was for me.
Okay, that's great to hear. So that's what I'm thinking. Like, people have different kinds of challenges. So Evelyn mentioned one, right? Like if you all want to add, or, something that you experienced, kindly share them with us. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was said earlier how Spanish isn't, in our lessons, and it's everybody wants to speak English and whatnot. And I really, it goes back to also them being so honest and sharing their stories like they did. That we needed to create that safe place for them to feel safe about talking about not just that, but talking in their native language also. That was absolutely a safe place to do it. We had to fit it into that curriculum that isn't really geared for that, that cookie cutter stuff that they want us to do. Um, but they opened up to it quite well. And but at first it was definitely a challenge.
Okay, that's great. That's fantastic. And then what about anyone else sharing this particular challenge? Or we can move on to the next question. Anyone want to share? Please feel free to share.
For me, it's for the students to feel comfortable, sharing some of the issues that we're facing that they were facing. I had some students from Matamoros that lived in the outskirts of Matamoros, in the Rancho area. And I mean, it didn't cross my mind how they would filter the water. So they were able to tell me, like, you know what, we have to boil it. And then they had like a piedra cantera, which you showed us a
Mm-hmm.
video as well. And
Yes.
I was amazed. I was like, and he kept offering, "Ma'am, do you want me to bring you a sample?" And I was like, "Sure." So then he's like, "This is the best water you ever drink." So then he brings me the sample, and it's full of like minerals in the bottom, and I'm like, "Oh gosh, hopefully I don't die." He's like, "No, try it, try it." And it was the fact that I was giving in, they were giving in, we were sharing things, and he's like waiting for me to try it. And I'm like, "Oh, Diosito." I'm like, so then I tried, and sure enough, honestly, it was the best, like the freshest water I've ever
Yeah.
drank. And the reason I share this is because, sometimes us as teachers, it's hard for us to gain their trust because we don't allow them, we don't give them our trust as well. So I noticed that changed the culture within that class because I have a lot of Spanish speakers. My classroom for environmental science is divided into honors classes and regular students. So for my regular students, it's much harder for them, to interact in the lesson. So the moment they saw me drinking that water, and I was like, you know what? And the reason for that being is because I always talk about water, the importance of spring water, alkaline water,
Mm.
how purified water is not good. It doesn't uh, quench your thirst. So they know that I am aware of the impurities that are found in the water and the importance of water. But that was certainly an experience, and it was good water. I'm not gonna lie. Hopefully, I don't die within the next month or so.
No, nothing will happen to you. Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, that's a great way to pass the baton over to Dr. Ortiz. She will be asking the next set of questions to you all. So, yeah, go ahead, Dr. Ortiz. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I'm just amazed, and honored to hear, the different questions and how you engage with the students. I totally agree. I really think that it's so critical to build trust with the students because I
Mm-hmm.
feel that ultimately it's so important to empower them because as you all mentioned before, they're future citizens and they're going to be making informed decisions. And I feel that throughout everything that I have been hearing is this notion of the ways that they know, the knowledge that
Mm-hmm.
they bring into the classroom, their language is a valid way of knowing, and they're doing empirical science. So I'm just, so happy to hear this. So I'll go to the next question. And I was thinking about how has teaching through an environmental justice lens changed your practice?
If I can, if I can answer
Yeah,
this,
sure.
it was extremely different to what I'm used to. And I'm usually just teaching a STAR tested area, so it's just curriculum, get ready for the exam, take the exam, breathe. There
Mm.
isn't much room for let's kind of try to apply this to real world application if it's not something that's going to be tested on. Thankfully, I got that class that year, and thankfully Ms. Vanessa came around because that was the way I was used to teaching. Just teach what they gave you on the scope and sequence and meet the timeline and get it done. After doing this lesson, after being able to have the opportunity to think from a different perspective, which is usually what you assume should be happening in a classroom, but it unfortunately isn't sometimes. Most of my lessons after that was, you know what, let's bring that environmentalist perspective back and let's see what else we can solve, what else we can connect to our real life and see if it's something affecting us. And so it was really different, very, very different. Unfortunately, I don't have that class anymore. I'm back to just testing for a STAR related exam or an AP related exam. So I'm back to being crunch time. But it was a very different method of teaching that I will for sure miss. And if I have that opportunity to teach a class like that again, that's going to be the lens I will continue using. I mean, the engagement of the kids was on a different level. Like the other lady said, after that, like they were at a different level of comfort as well, being able to come up and tell me some issues of what's happening with, and not like just personal things, but like science related items for the chapters that came after. It was just a lot different. The way the kids interacted with the lessons afterwards was very different to what I'm used to, which is just drill and kill.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for sharing that. Anybody else would like to?
It was just it was just so powerful, the ownership that they took in this project, that it was no longer about, me teaching them something and they got to learn it just because they have to learn it. Now that they were able to put it into practice and see it in coming from their own resaca, um, it was like eye-opening to them, and they definitely saw the unit, which normally, because I mean, I've been teaching for quite a bit of years now. Normally it's just we go over it and it's gone. Like it didn't hold any space in within them. They just learned it, tested, let it go. And this time they owned it. And one of them even went on to use this idea for a science fair this year. So they actually took this and they took it a step further, and they did even more investigations. And so having to see how it affects them in the environment, and how it connects to, like, what we learn isn't just something that we have to learn, but there's real world applications to it. It was just so empowering.
Thank you so much for sharing. Absolutely. I feel that also, a common response that I am listening to is navigating the curricular constraints that, are imposed, right? And I know that this was shared earlier with respect to, the curriculum, how it can be very generalized, right? And thinking about the challenges in making the students' assets visible. And I think that with that in mind, this is a great segue to the next question with respect to students' funds of knowledge. So how did you feel that, or how did students' funds of knowledge from their families enrich the scientific learning?
I think when the students were able to make the real world connections and involve their family, and linguistically incorporate their native language, that's what really made the connection. And it opened the door of, like, you know what, I'm not only learning this for myself, but I'm also learning this for my culture, and I'm also allowed linguistically to use my native language. It's not a hindrance anymore. When we conducted the interviews where we incorporated the parents, the families, the grandparents, and they were able to come back with these stories, with these statements. And as Mr. Powell mentioned, when she was reading those stories or those statements, it really saw it allowed us to see these students as a whole, not only what we see in front of us, but what is their background, you know linguistically, what are they speaking at home, how are their parents involved in their education as well when they're allowed to, because unfortunately a lot of these parents are not allowed, or they're not involved in the lessons or in the students education because of the language barrier. So when we drop that bar where the language is actually not a barrier, you see that they start working together. Like when I mentioned that student, when he brought that water for me from the grandparents, and he says he doesn't live with the grandparents; they live in a different house. But he was able to go to his grandparents' house and take pictures of this filtering system, which, I mean, I was amazed by, because it's things that they're not common. It's not things that we come across, that they still exist, but because they're in the outskirts, then unfortunately we don't get to see it. So the fact that he wasn't only able to incorporate his parents, but also his grandparents, he showed more interest in the lesson. So that's what for me made the connection and made my lessons more accessible to the students and the families.
Mhm. Thank you so much for sharing that. I feel that my perspective is based on what you're saying, empowering the students to see themselves represented in the lessons. And I think that very much with the parents, that is such an important point because we see the research. We know that the students whose parents are more involved in their educational experiences tend to do better, tend to have better academic performance. And what a valuable way to move away from alienating the language, as the typical curriculum that is very generalized to, in a way, welcoming, right? And totally shifting how the curriculum is presented. So I'm so thankful that you brought that up with respect to the language and how important is it that we hear about the importance of linguistically sustaining education, but your narrative very much brings to light, right, the importance not only for the student but also for the parents as well, and I think that also from a social emotional perspective as well, I wonder if maybe would these conversations would even have taken place with the traditional curriculum. So that's so valuable. Thank you for sharing.
Right. And I actually doubt it because as I mentioned, and all of the teachers here have mentioned, our curriculum is very, very strict and very limited. Unfortunately, it doesn't give us room to create these lessons, making these real world connections. We are allotted a certain amount of time and we have to process to the lesson. And unfortunately, some of these lessons, they're not meaningful to the student because it doesn't allow us to create and plan the lesson for the student. And when I mean and plan and create the lesson for the student, I mean not only linguistically, but I mean culturally and actually connecting it to where we live. I mean, we could have created this lesson, but investigated Flint, Michigan. It would have been a huge difference because the real world connection is not happening. Whereas, you know what? These are the issues we're facing in the area that you live in. This is the water that you're drinking, you're bathing in. What issues are you coming across? And these are issues that we have seen them for generations, but they were never able to be identified. One, because of the language barrier. Unfortunately, like I mentioned, I have a lot of Spanish speaking students where the parents and the grandparents don't speak English. So when you get to involve the families, they're able to give you pieces of the story that create and make the connection.
Absolutely. May I add to that also?
Yes.
I've always been leaning toward the environmentalist side of things. I lived in Northern California in a very beautiful area. However, I lived in a cabin in the middle of nowhere in a river valley, and we had our water came from a spring in the side of the mountain, and we had to deal with solar panels and all those. We were off the grid completely. And when I share those experiences with my students, I see a disconnect, and I'm like, okay, why aren't they understanding what I'm talking about? Really, it's because, and I get it. They don't relate with that. They've never been there, and it's not talking about their culture or anything about their backgrounds. It's me, and so this really invited a whole new spectrum to that, and I really, really saw them open up and just really delve into the lessons and delve into what they were doing. And it enriched it so much that they got their families involved, and they really took it to heart. It became their own, like Celine was saying, that they took ownership in a way that I hadn't really seen before in my classroom. So that was just beautiful.
Just wanted to add that I was seriously blessed and fortunate to have gone to each and every one of all of their awesome teachers' classrooms, and I could see it firsthand, how much engagement I saw from the students. It was so gratifying for me. That's what we are hoping for. And also, uh, these teachers, they've taken it to the next level, in the sense that, we didn't stop at that lesson, right? Like, these people went ahead, hunted for, videos. So, for example, like, they took videos from Matamoros or somewhere, just really, I mean, I'm so very grateful to have worked with and still continuing to work with them. And one thing I also noticed is, like, I did provide some research articles to them, but they customized them to, basically, how to read students. We can't tell them to read 20 pages of research article, right? Like, they can only process maybe a chunk or a little bit of the thing. So these people were amazing. They created the abstract, they cut and paste into this, and they told them to write some kind of research analysis report or something like that. That was super powerful, I felt. So, I just had to bring this up because I saw so much growth in them as teachers who are using culturally sustaining pedagogies. And we really completed a protocol, even, we did a self assessment, and that was a huge, there was a huge shift, the ways in which you learn, and it's going to stay with them. It's not going to, like, that's what I felt happen as like someone who's doing this kind of research, and interacting with teachers and students, seeing students and observing and learning and all of these things. So that's a little bit of what I wanted to share. Yes, Beatrice. Yes.
Yes, and I wanted to mention, I think the reason that this project was so successful is because you provided the foundation, but you gave us
Mm-hmm.
the freedom to create our lessons. And you can see the details in each of our lessons. They're all covering the same material, but they're all different in their own
Different.
way. And I think that's what made a difference, because if we would have all created the same lesson or planned the same lesson, you wouldn't have seen the differences that we were able to see in our classroom. You gave us the freedom to plan to what we had in our classrooms. And I think, like, Evelyn and I worked great together. We planned the lessons, but she still implemented lessons that were going to work for her students, and I implement lessons that were going to implement my student. And I think that's what gave us a good variety of data. And I see it with the teachers from San Benito as well. They also implemented the lesson, but it was
Mm-hmm.
designed to what would work best in their classroom. So like I said, I think that's what made this a success. You provided the
Mm-hmm.
foundation, but you gave us the freedom to actually work with what would be best.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I'm so very grateful to have worked. Yeah. Yes, Miriam, please.
Thank you so much. And you know what? That is such a great segue to the next question, because this is taking a reflective approach with your development and your practices and your learning. So the question is, what professional development or support was most valuable throughout this experience, and how has your teaching philosophy evolved?
I, w- if I may go, um, I think just the support Miss Dr. Vanessa offered to us was most of the professional development I got for this. Um, my campus didn't really much offer for the sake of that course, or especially for like incorporating the cultural linguistic strategy. And like I said, the campus where I'm at, it's very much English, 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 English. There is no professional development for how can we incorporate different languages. How can we incorporate that? That's never been the goal. So was Dr. Ganesh like offered to me, or for us, to me, was the training that helped me develop the lesson. The bits of samples that she offered for us, the little ideas, the paper she shared, was the way I was able to open up my ideas and generate different parts of my lessons, and making them more elaborate, making them more engaging. Um, and from here on out, like now I know, you know what, these kids may not be able to, like what Dr. Gunness is saying, they may not be able to read the whole article, but I can give them a snippet, and that'll be enough to get my point across. And that'll be enough for them to also practice, let me practice analyzing higher leveled um, papers, and let me try creating ideas from it. And so that's something I now use in a new section on teaching, and I brought it with me. So thank you, Dr. Ganesan. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I feel so very grateful. Yes. Yeah.
I agree. She was very helpful because I know that in the very beginning there was many times that I was like, oh, what is this? I'm not sure I can do this. I don't know what's going on. And when she would come and talk with us and visit with us, and then I remember she shared the website that one of her colleagues had created from, I don't remember from what city.
Nebraska. Yeah,
Nebraska.
Nebraska. Hmm.
That I was like, wow, that is so empowering to see what he has created, and
Hmm.
just the different resources that you were helping. And then, oh my god, she's so kind, the kindest lady I've ever met.
Oh.
And it without her help, I think I don't know, maybe I would have bowed out from this, but I'm so glad that I didn't, because it was just so rewarding to see the outcome.
I think working with her, it gave us an opportunity, and it kind of like dropped the blindfold that it's like, you know what? You can still present the curriculum in a manner that the information is still being presented, but you can adapt it to the student culturally and linguistically. We're not breaking any laws or any rules. You are still presenting the information, but now we're adopting it to what would be best for the population that you're serving. And as the other teachers have mentioned, working with her was great. Anytime we had any questions, she would constantly either email us or call us, or we would talk over the phone. And it was a little bit nerve-wracking in the beginning because it's not something that we were used to. We're told since the beginning that unfortunately when we have ELL students, we need to make sure we practice their English as much as we can. So when that window is down and it's like, well, you know what? No, you can allow them to use their native language to a certain extent. You can allow them to feel comfortable. So I think that's what made a huge difference. And from now on, that's how I've created my lessons, where I'm still presenting the information, but now I'm allowing them to use their native language as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. I mean, I'm super humbled by your comments, but still, I really loved working with you, and also would love to continue working with you all. So that's the only comment I can give you all. Like, yeah. Yes, Miriam. Yeah.
Thank you so much for
I think we have time for two more questions. I think questions 9 and 10 maybe. Yeah.
Yes. And so the question is, what surprised you most about this project? And in your response, you could perhaps consider, did any students do something that maybe you didn't expect?
The thing that surprised me most was their participation. It was I have the kid that I always have to wake up, that is always trying to fall asleep. And with this, they were like, I'm not exaggerating. They were so focused, and it was competitive, and it was their own baby. It was their own puppy. And what surprised me is just their level of involvement. I had never seen them be so engaged in anything that I teach. Like, yes, they can pay attention, they can do well, they can score high, but it's just, it's in and then out. And this time they truly formed a connection. So I really enjoyed it.
Thank
In my classroom, it was the results. The fact that we all thought like, oh, our Brownsville water is going to be much, much cleaner than our Matamoros water. It's like, oh, never mind. It's like, forget it. So that was my shocker. I was like, I was not expecting that. And I'm not saying that, you know what, the Brownsville water was going to be better, but I just thought we had a stronger filtering system, which that ended up propelling me to getting a filtering system in my house because I was like, well, forget it. And then, so that was one thing. And then after that, because of the lesson we created, then we moved on into studying dirt. So I skipped some chapters because I wanted to continue the connection. So we did the water pollution, and then we started studying soil pollution. How are these crops being affected? What is happening? So it kind of led to all these other lessons, and it created a connection where the students were a little bit more hands-on, more involved, more labs were being implemented. It wasn't taking such a longer time to implement these labs. So that's what really helped my classroom. It kind of got the ball rolling that, you know what, we can continue this with other lessons. We don't have to limit it only to water pollution.
I love that. Thank you. And that's a great transition to our closing question with respect to, and I really love how you made the connection with, to me, it sounds like, you're able to now transfer that from one unit into another unit, seeing the engagement and seeing how the students, like Ms. Becerra mentioned, took ownership and they were so engaged, right? And they had that sense, of engagement as they were investigating. So this makes us think about, the notion of environmental injustice and how it very likely is not only happening in our own context in the Rio Grande Valley. So what advice would you give to other educators who want to implement culturally sustaining environmental STEM in their own context? And where would you tell them to start if they want to begin this work?
I think that my advice would be to start with basically what students already know. Their language, their families, their culture, their community, and begin there because it's an incredible resource, right? You don't need to overhaul anything, to your whole lesson plan or anything else because it's something that's already there in the students' lives. And start small. That'd be the only thing I could think of to suggest.
Thank you very much.
I wonder if you can share this last question. Yeah. Thank you.
I would say the advice I would give is just think about what they can do at home. That's how I would. I'm used to not really giving too much homework in my other classes because they're freshman classes, and this one I was like, you know what, it's a junior and it's a senior class. Like, let's give them. And the homework wasn't difficult. Was bring me water samples. Go give this interview to your grandparents or your parents. But what I noticed is every single chapter, at least in this course, and most science courses are the same. You can relate it to something around you. You can relate it to something going on at home. Like Beatriz, Miss Escobedo said, the soil, the next chapter, that's also something I asked. Bring me soil samples from home. And that would be my biggest advice. Just think about which part of the chapter relates to something around you whenever at the moment you step outside of campus, and make it around that. So that way they can make that connection to it's not just my grade, it's knowledge I can take with me. It's knowledge I can leave the hallway, leave the classroom, leave the parking lot, and realize this is something around me. Like it's important to me, it's important to the people around me.
I think my advice is don't be so afraid to stay away from, or, just, how do I word this, to switch to student led investigations. It's so powerful. We're always scared that they won't know in which direction to take it. If we give them that much autonomy, what are they going to create? Will they be able to produce what we need them to produce? And it was eye-opening to see what they are capable of, and just with just the right amount of direction, how we can empower them to create their own path, and just to know that that lesson is going to stick with them because they had ownership. And it's, as a teacher, it's really hard sometimes to let go of that responsibility, of that role of you being the holder of the knowledge and you imparting that onto them, and just realize that, hey, no, like they are perfectly capable of, and they will surprise you every single time you give them that opportunity.
Thank you.
My advice would be just work with Dr. Anissa. Let her teach you. Let her do the teachings, and then from there you'll learn what you need to do. Nah, but in all seriousness, I think my advice is don't underestimate your English language learners. They want to participate. They want to participate under the right environment. I don't have any issue with my honors students participating. They automatically participate, but it's the English language learners, don't be afraid of involving a little bit of homework, a little bit of bringing these test samples, a little bit of these interviews where we think and we're hesitant, like these kids are not going to bring the work. But then we're surprised. We're like, you know what? They did do the interviews. They were excited about the material. So I think learn to be a little bit more open-minded, that when you allow these students to feel comfortable linguistically and culturally in your classroom, you are going to see a difference in participation.
Thank you so much. And again, it's just such an honor to hear, and the connections and the experiences and the impact that this work had on the students. So thank you all for your thoughtful engagement, and to those of you who are seeing this, thank you for your engagement with our NARS community. As I reflect on everything that has been discussed, I feel that for me, this work reflects a pedagogy of love. And when I say that, I think about, you have care for your students, you have high expectations, you validate and honor your students' languages and their lived experiences. And not only that, you also give them real tools that they can use to reflect upon the world and be able to improve the world. So thank you so much to all of our panelists for modeling that so powerfully. And as we close this evening, I invite our participants to take one idea from today and to try it in your own context. I do invite everybody to please stay connected with LARIG, and thank you again for being here.
Thank you again. Again, Dr. Ortiz, you've been you encapsulated all what the teachers said in such a powerful, scholarly connection of pedagogy of love of Freire. Yeah, Paulo Freire is one of the great Brazilian scholars who has talked about, pedagogy of the oppressed, pedagogy of love, and pedagogy of hope, and so many things. So we as educators, we are committed to providing support and love to our students and see them succeed. That's our main goal. And thank you all very, very much. And to the global NAS community, thank you all. And we look forward to engaging with you at the NAS 2026 conference. Thank you all, and see you, and good night. Yeah. Bye bye.